The phone rang during Sunday pot roast, and my husband's face went pale as death when he saw the caller ID. I wasn't supposed to hear her voice through the speaker. "James, when are you coming over? You promised you'd tell her tonight that you're moving in with me tomorrow." 5 years of marriage shattered in 15 seconds, exposing a double life I never suspected. What happened next would transform not just my broken heart, but my entire understanding of who I was meant to be. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crystal wine glass shattered against our dining room wall, red liquid streaming down the cream wallpaper like blood. I hadn't thrown it. That was Catherine, my 15-year-old stepdaughter, her face contorted with a rage I'd never seen before. "You promised you'd never hurt her." She screamed at her father, James, who sat frozen at the head of our mahogany dining table, the phone still clutched in his hand, its speaker broadcasting nothing but shocked silence now. I remained seated, oddly calm, as if watching the scene unfold from somewhere outside my body. The Sunday pot roast I'd spent hours preparing sat cooling on our antique china plates. Catherine's younger brother, Michael, only 12, stared at his lap, shoulders hunched as if trying to disappear. The grandfather clock in the hallway ticked with unbearable precision, marking each second of this new, unthinkable reality. "Eliza, I can explain," James finally said, his voice steady and controlled. The same voice he used when addressing juries as one of Boston's most respected defense attorneys. The voice that had charmed me at a charity auction 5 years ago. The voice I now realized I'd never fully trusted. "Her name is Veronica," I said quietly, piecing together fragments of information I'd unconsciously collected over months. "She's the real estate agent who showed us the summer house in Cape Cod. The one you said was too persistent. The one who kept calling about other properties even after we declined." James's eyes widened slightly, the only confirmation I needed. Even now, he was calculating, assessing how much I knew, planning his defense. "How long?" I asked, my voice still unnaturally calm. "Mom, let's go," Catherine said, standing beside me now, her initial rage cooling into something harder, more determined. Though she was James's daughter from his first marriage, she and I had formed a bond deeper than I'd ever expected when I married her father. "You don't need to hear this right now." But I did need to hear it. Needed to understand how thoroughly I'd been deceived. 8 months, James said, setting down the phone at last. "It wasn't planned, Eliza. These things happen in marriages. If you'd been more available, more understanding of the pressures I've been under with the Morrison case." "Don't you dare," Catherine cut in, her voice trembling. "Don't you dare blame her for your choices." Michael finally looked up, tears streaming silently down his face. "Are you leaving us, Dad?" The question hung in the air, bringing the situation into devastating clarity. This wasn't just an affair. This was James dismantling our family, piece by piece, while maintaining a perfect facade. "I was going to tell you tonight, after dinner," James said, looking not at his son, but at me. "I've signed a lease on a condo in the Back Bay. Veronica and we're going to try to build something real." Something real. As if the life we'd built together had been merely a practice run, a draft to be discarded. I looked around our dining room, at the built-in cabinets displaying wedding china we'd selected together, at the family photographs lining the walls, at the children we'd raised in this restored Victorian we'd spent 2 years renovating. Every corner contained evidence of what I'd thought was our shared life. Now I saw it for what it truly was, a beautifully designed cage, constructed to keep me busy while James pursued what he really wanted. "When were you planning to move out?" I asked, surprised by the practical nature of my question when my heart was splintering inside my chest. "Tomorrow," he admitted, with at least the decency to look uncomfortable. I've already packed most of what I need. I was going to talk to you all tonight, explain how this doesn't change how much I care about this family. Tomorrow, I repeated, the word finally cracking my composure. You've planned this all so carefully, haven't you? While I was organizing Michael's science fair project and attending Catherine's debate tournaments and managing the house renovation and maintaining my career, you were, what? Shopping for furniture with her? Planning your new life? Eliza, be reasonable. These things are complicated. No, I said, standing up at last. This isn't complicated. This is very, very simple. With deliberate calmness, I walked to the sideboard where my purse sat. I removed my wallet and phone, then handed the designer handbag, a gift from James on our last anniversary, to him. You forgot to pack this, I said. I'm sure Veronica would appreciate such a thoughtful housewarming gift. His face flushed with anger. You're being childish. We need to discuss this rationally. Like you rationally planned to abandon your family? Or rationally decided to let your girlfriend call during our dinner to pressure you into revealing your plans? My voice remained steady, though I could feel something building inside me, not just anger or grief, but something else, something that felt strangely like freedom. Mom, Catherine said softly, placing her hand on my arm. Let's go upstairs. We don't have to do this now. I looked at this young woman, not my biological daughter, but so fiercely part of my heart, and then at Michael, still silently crying at the table. They had already lost one mother when James's first wife died of cancer 7 years ago. Now they were watching their father choose himself over them yet again. You're right, I told Catherine. Then I turned back to James. We don't have to do this now. In fact, we don't have to do this at all. You've made your decision, and it requires no input from me. Eliza, you should go tonight, I continued, the words forming with surprising clarity. Why wait until tomorrow? Veronica is clearly eager to start your new life together. This is my house too, he began, his lawyer's instinct for property rights emerging even in this moment. Yes, it is, I agreed. And we'll address that appropriately through legal channels. But tonight, you should go to the woman you've chosen. The children and I need space to process this betrayal without watching you pack your cufflinks and cologne. Something in my tone must have finally penetrated his self-absorption, because James stood, straightening his custom shirt with an automatic gesture. I never meant to hurt any of you, he said, looking at each of us. Sometimes people grow apart. Sometimes unexpected connections happen. You'll understand eventually. No, we won't, Catherine said firmly. And neither will Mom's family when they find out, or your colleagues, or the partners at your firm who have morality clauses in their contracts. Neither will Judge Harrington when she learns her favorite attorney conducts his personal life with such integrity. James paled slightly. My stepdaughter had clearly inherited his strategic mind and was not afraid to use it. Let's not make threats, he said quietly. There's no need for this to become ugly. The laugh that escaped me sounded foreign to my own ears. It became ugly the moment you decided to pursue another woman while maintaining the fiction of our marriage. It became hideous when you planned to abandon your children along with your wife. I'm not abandoning them, he protested. We'll work out custody arrangements, visitation. Save it for the lawyers, I interrupted. Tonight, please just go. For a moment, I thought he might argue further. Then his phone buzzed with a text message. Veronica, no doubt, wondering why their plot had gone awry. He glanced at it, then nodded once. I'll get some things, he said, heading toward the stairs. Catherine, go with your father, I said quietly. Make. Sure, he takes only what belongs to him. She nodded, giving my hand a quick squeeze before following James upstairs. Michael and I sat in silence for several minutes. Then he asked in a small voice, "What happens to us now?" The question cut through my shock. reminding me that while my marriage might be over, my responsibilities were not. These children, who had accepted me as a stepmother, who had welcomed me into their lives after losing their mother, needed stability now more than ever. We stay together, I said firmly. We adjust. We move forward. But this is Dad's house, Michael said. He bought it before he even met you. Another truth I'd conveniently ignored: how James had maintained control of our most basic security, insisting that keeping the house in his name simplified our finances. Then we'll find a new home, I said, the idea taking shape as I spoke. One that belongs to us, that we choose together. Michael looked doubtful. Can we afford that? With just your salary from the museum? The question highlighted yet another aspect of the life I'd accepted: how I'd allowed my career as a museum curator to become secondary, taking a part-time position to accommodate James's demanding schedule and the children's needs. How I'd become financially dependent despite my education and experience. We'll figure it out, I promised him, though I had no idea how. What I did know was that the woman I'd been before this moment, the accommodating wife, the perfect hostess, the supportive stepmother who never rocked the boat, was already fading away. In her place, someone new was emerging, someone I didn't yet recognize but felt compelled to become. Upstairs, drawers opened and closed. Voices murmured. The infrastructure of our family was being dismantled, item by item. I reached across the table and took Michael's hand. This isn't the end, I told him. It's just the beginning of something different. I didn't know then how prophetic those words would prove to be, or how the unraveling of my carefully constructed life would lead to discoveries that would transform not just my circumstances, but my entire sense of who I was and what I was capable of becoming. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. The house felt cavernous after James left. His presence, or rather, the absence of it, seemed to echo through the rooms like a persistent ghost. Catherine and Michael finally fell asleep around midnight, curled together on Catherine's bed like they used to do as smaller children during thunderstorms. I covered them with an extra blanket and retreated to the guest room, unable to face the master bedroom with its king-sized bed and James's lingering cologne. Sleep evaded me entirely. Instead, I found myself mentally cataloging the progression of my marriage, how I'd met James at a museum fundraiser where he'd been representing a prominent donor, how charmed I'd been by his knowledge of Renaissance art, how carefully he'd courted me, seeming to understand exactly what would appeal to a 32-year-old curator who'd prioritized her career over relationships. I'd been so flattered by his attention, so touched by his apparent need for help with his grieving children. When he proposed after only 6 months, I'd ignored the whispers of caution from friends who thought it was too soon. When he suggested I reduce my hours at the museum to help create a more stable home environment for Catherine and Michael, I'd convinced myself it was the right choice. A chance to make a difference in the lives of 2 children who had already experienced profound loss. Now, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling of the guest room, I wondered how much of our relationship had been calculated on his part. Had he been looking specifically for someone who would take on the responsibilities his children's mother had left behind? Had I been selected for my nurturing qualities rather than loved for myself? The questions circled without resolution until dawn painted the room in pale gold light. I rose, splashed cold water on my face, and made my way to the kitchen to prepare breakfast before the children woke. The routine felt like a lifeline in the chaos, measuring coffee grounds, whisking eggs, toasting bread. Simple actions that required just enough focus to quiet the roaring in my mind. As I worked, I noticed things I'd overlooked before. How the kitchen had been designed primarily to impress guests rather than function efficiently for the person who actually cooked. how the expensive appliances James had insisted on were more about status than utility. How even the placement of the house, in Boston's exclusive Beacon Hill neighborhood, prioritized his professional image over our family's daily needs. "You're making breakfast." Catherine's voice from the doorway startled me. She was still wearing yesterday's clothes, her long dark hair tangled from restless sleep. "Force of habit," I replied, pushing a mug of coffee toward her. At 15, she was already a dedicated coffee drinker, something James disapproved of, but I hadn't. Had the heart to forbid. "I thought you might be curled up in bed crying," she said, taking the mug with a grateful nod. "That's what happened when Mom died. Dad didn't get out of bed for 3 days." The simple comparison between James's grief for his first wife and my reaction to his betrayal struck me as profoundly telling. Not because I felt less pain, but because somewhere inside me lived an instinct for forward motion that even this shock couldn't completely derail. "I think I'm still in shock," I admitted, sliding eggs onto a plate. "The crying will probably come later." She nodded, unusually solemn. "Michael finally fell asleep around 4. He kept asking if it was his fault somehow." My heart contracted. "None of this is his fault. Or yours." "Or yours," she added pointedly. "Dad has always been selfish. Mom used to say he loved the idea of family more than the reality of it." The insight from James's first wife, a woman I'd never met but whose absence had shaped our household in countless ways, felt like a piece of a puzzle I was only now recognizing. "Your mother sounds like she was very wise," I said carefully. Catherine's expression softened. "She would have liked you, I think. She wouldn't have liked how Dad treated you." Before I could respond, my phone rang, the distinctive tone I'd assigned to my younger sister, Olivia. I hesitated, not ready to explain last night's revelation to anyone outside our immediate household. "You should answer," Catherine urged. "You're going to need your people now." My people. The concept felt foreign after 5 years of gradually disconnecting from my pre-James life. I'd maintained basic contact with family and close friends, but I realized with a start that I'd stopped confiding in them, stopped sharing the intimate details of my life. Whether this isolation had been deliberate on James's part or simply a byproduct of my increasingly demanding role in his household, the result was the same. When I most needed support, I felt uncertain about reaching for it. I answered the phone. "Eliza, thank God," Olivia's voice came through, breathless and worried. "I've been calling since last night. Why haven't you been answering?" "How did you know?" I asked, bypassing her question entirely. There was a pause. Then, "Know what? I'm calling because Mom fell yesterday. She's okay, just a sprained wrist. But given her osteoporosis, the doctor wanted to be cautious." Our mother, another relationship that had suffered under the constraints of my marriage. James had found her difficult and intrusive, gradually reducing our visits from weekly to monthly to holiday-only occasions. "I'm sorry to hear about Mom," I said, genuine concern mixing with relief that Olivia didn't yet know about my marital implosion. "I should come see her." "That would be great, but wait, what's going on? You sound strange." I met Catherine's encouraging gaze across the kitchen counter and made a decision. "James left yesterday. He's been having an affair. He's moved in with her." The silence on the other end stretched so long I thought we might have been disconnected. Then, "I'm coming over, right now, don't argue." "Olivia, you don't need to—" "I'll be there in 40 minutes, she interrupted and hung up. Catherine smiled slightly. "Your sister sounds like someone who gets things done." "She is," I agreed, feeling a flicker of something like hope. "She's also someone who never liked James and has been waiting 5 years to say, 'I told you so.'" "Good," Catherine said firmly. "We need people on our side who saw through him from the beginning." The simple "we" in her statement brought tears to my eyes for the first time since James's phone had rung during dinner. Catherine was including herself in my corner, claiming our connection despite her father's betrayal. The realization was both comforting and terrifying. This teenage girl was counting on me to remain in her life, to continue being a mother figure even as my legal connection to her was dissolving. "Catherine," I began carefully, "you know that whatever happens with the divorce, I still consider you and Michael my family. That won't change." She set down her coffee mug with deliberate precision. "Dad's lawyer friends will try to keep us from you. They'll say you have no legal rights to us." The blunt assessment, so characteristic of her precocious understanding of adult matters, hit me like a physical blow. She was right, of course. In the eyes of the law, I was nothing to these children I'd helped raise for 5 years. James could cut me out of their lives entirely if he chose, and given his current actions, such cruelty seemed entirely possible. "We'll figure something out," I said, trying to project more confidence than I felt. "We already have," she replied, pulling a folded paper from her pocket. "Michael and I stayed up making a plan last night. We know Dad's passwords for everything: his email, his investment accounts, even his secret Venmo that he uses to pay for things he doesn't want to show up on the credit card statements." I stared at her, alarmed both by this information and by whatever she intended to do with it. "Catherine, we're not going to do anything illegal," she assured me quickly. "But we are going to make sure he can't just throw you away. You're our mom now, and we're not letting him take that from us, too." The fierce protectiveness in her voice, this child preparing to defend an adult who should have been protecting her, broke something open inside me. Tears came at last, streaming down my face as I reached across the counter to grasp her hand. "I love you both so much," I managed through the tears. "But this isn't your battle to fight. Your job right now is to be 15, to let the adults handle the adult problems." She looked at me with her father's penetrating gaze, but none of his coldness. "No offense, Eliza, but you've been letting Dad handle everything for 5 years, and look where that got us." The assessment was brutal but fair. I had abdicated too many decisions, accepted too many limitations, all in the name of making a blended family work. The realization was humbling, but also clarifying. If I wanted to maintain my relationship with these children, I would need to fight for it. Not just legally, but by becoming someone stronger and more independent than the woman James had chosen precisely for her malleability. Before I could respond, the doorbell rang. Olivia, arriving even earlier than promised. Catherine slid off her stool. "I'll get it," she said, "and I'll check on Michael. You should talk to your sister alone first." As she left, I quickly wiped my tears and straightened my shoulders, an automatic response to impending company that seemed absurd under the circumstances. Moments later, Olivia burst into the kitchen, my younger sister, 5'0" of concentrated determination, her curly hair escaping from a hasty ponytail, her nurse's scrubs suggesting she'd come directly from a night shift. She took one look at me and opened her arms. I stepped into her embrace and felt something in me uncoil, a tension I'd been carrying not just since last night, but for years. "That absolute bastard," she murmured against my hair. "I'm going to kill him." Despite everything, I laughed. Rusty, broken sound, but genuine. "Get in line behind Catherine. She's already plotting his demise." Olivia pulled back to look at me, her expression serious. "I want to hear everything. But first, are you okay? Really okay?" The question was simple but profound. Was I okay? The woman I'd been yesterday, James's wife, the children's stepmother, the part-time curator and full-time homemaker, that woman was not okay at all. She had been shattered by a phone call and its aftermath, but beneath the wreckage, something else was stirring, something I'd buried so deeply I'd almost forgotten its existence. A version of myself I'd set aside to fit into the life James had designed. And that woman, the one who had earned 2 advanced degrees, who had once navigated international art acquisitions with confidence, who had dreams and ambitions beyond creating the perfect home, she was still there, waiting. "No," I answered honestly. "I'm not okay, but I think I might be eventually." Olivia nodded, understanding the distinction. "Then let's get to work," she said, rolling up her sleeves with characteristic efficiency. "First, we change the locks. Then we call Mom's divorce attorney friend. Then we figure out exactly what that man has been hiding from you, because I guarantee it's more than just a girlfriend." For the first time since James's phone had buzzed during our family dinner, I felt a sense of possibility rather than just loss, a door opening where a wall had been. The path ahead was unclear and undoubtedly difficult, but it was mine to determine. "Ours," I amended silently, thinking of Catherine and Michael upstairs, already strategizing how we would remain a family despite James's abandonment. "Okay," I agreed, matching my sister's resolute tone. "Let's get to work." By afternoon, our Victorian home on Beacon Hill had transformed into an impromptu command center. Olivia had called in reinforcements, our middle sister Madeline, who happened to be an accountant, and her husband Ben, a real estate attorney. They arrived with laptops, legal pads, and determination etched on their faces. "I can't believe—" "I haven't been in this house for over a year," Madeline remarked, glancing around the formal living room where we'd gathered. She didn't add what we all knew, that her last visit had ended with James making cutting remarks about her modest lifestyle until she left early, in tears. "James was always busy when I suggested family gatherings," I said, the excuse sounding hollow even to my own ears. Madeline gave me a look that balanced compassion with skepticism. "That's one interpretation." Ben spread several documents across the antique coffee table. "First things first, we need to understand where you stand legally. The house is solely in James's name." I nodded, embarrassment heating my cheeks. "He bought it before we married. When I suggested adding my name after the wedding, he said it would complicate things unnecessarily." "Of course he did," Olivia muttered. "And your finances?" Madeline asked gently. "Joint accounts? Separate? Who handled the bill payments?" "One joint checking account for household expenses," I explained. "I deposit my museum salary there. James transfers money in monthly for the major bills, which he pays. He has separate accounts for his personal expenses, investments, that sort of thing." Madeline and Ben exchanged glances that communicated volumes. She opened her laptop. "Let's see exactly what we're working with." While Madeline began analyzing the financial records I could access, Ben outlined the legal realities of my situation. The news wasn't encouraging. As a stepmother with no formal adoption agreements, I had no legal rights to Catherine and Michael. The house belonged entirely to James. Massachusetts, being an equitable distribution state, offered some protection for marital assets, but determining what qualified would be complex. "I know this sounds dire," Ben said, noting my expression, "but we're getting ahead of the game by gathering information now. James doesn't strike me as someone who planned for his deception to be discovered this way. He may have made mistakes." As if summoned by our strategy session, my phone rang with James's number. Everyone fell silent as I answered, putting it on speaker. "Eliza," his voice came through, smooth and controlled as ever. "We need to talk about practical arrangements. I'll be sending movers for the rest of my things tomorrow. I'd also like to speak with Catherine and Michael." "They're not available right now," I replied, surprised by the steadiness in my voice. "They're my children," he said, a hint of irritation breaking through his professional demeanor. "I have a right to speak with them." "Yes, you do. When they're ready. They're still processing your decision to move in with your girlfriend without warning." His sigh was audible, the put-upon sound he often used in arguments, positioning himself as the reasonable party dealing with irrational opposition. "Eliza, I understand you're upset, but we need to handle this maturely. I've spoken with my attorney this morning. He'll be contacting you about settlement terms. I think you'll find them generous, provided we can keep this amicable. The familiar manipulation, the implied threat wrapped in reasonableness, triggered something unexpected in me. Not fear or acquiescence, but clarity. I've also consulted an attorney, I replied, nodding toward Ben. And I'd prefer all communication go through proper legal channels from now on. A pause, then. You've already hired a lawyer? That seems premature and unnecessarily adversarial. About as premature as leasing a condo with your girlfriend. While still married, I countered. And about as adversarial as planning to leave your family with 1 day's notice. Another pause, longer this time. When he spoke again, his voice had hardened. I see you're determined to make this difficult. That's disappointing but not surprising. I'll have my attorney contact yours immediately. The call ended abruptly. Olivia reached over and squeezed my hand. That, she said with grim satisfaction, was the sound of a man realizing he's not controlling the narrative anymore. Before I could respond, Catherine appeared in the doorway, Michael half hidden behind her. Both had clearly been listening. Dad. Called us, too, Catherine said. He left voicemails about how much he loves us and how this change is difficult for everyone. Did you call him back? I asked, careful to keep my tone neutral. Whatever my feelings about James, I didn't want to place the children in the middle of our conflict. Michael shook his head. We don't want to talk to him yet. That's understandable, I assured him. Take the time you need. Madeline looked up from her computer screen, her expression troubled. Eliza, could the children give us a few minutes? There's something here you should see privately first. Catherine's eyes narrowed. If it's about Dad, we deserve to know. Catherine, I began. We've already lost one parent to death and another to his selfishness, she interrupted fiercely. We're not going to be protected from the truth anymore. It doesn't work. Her words hung in the air, challenging the adult instinct to shield children from harsh realities. I looked at Michael, quieter, but no less affected, and recognized that they had already endured more loss than many adults. Perhaps transparency, handled compassionately, was the greater kindness. You're right, I conceded. But some financial and legal details might be unnecessary and... It's not unnecessary if it affects where we live and who takes care of us, Michael said, his soft voice carrying unexpected conviction. Madeline sighed and turned her laptop, so we could all see the screen. I've been examining the banking records you have access to, Eliza. There's a pattern of large withdrawals from the joint account. Money you thought was going toward household expenses and the children's education funds. How large? I asked, a cold feeling settling in my stomach. Over $300,000 in the past 18 months alone, she replied grimly. Based on the timing of these withdrawals and what you've told us about when James's affair began. He's been financing his new life with our family funds, I finished, the realization like ice water in my veins. Catherine moved closer, studying the screen over Madeline's shoulder. That's the money from Mom's life insurance, isn't it? The money that was supposed to be for our college? Madeline looked up sharply. What life insurance? When Mom died, Catherine explained, her voice carefully controlled. She left a life insurance policy specifically for our education. Dad said he invested it for us. There were statements. That came sometimes, but they stopped about a year ago. He said they'd gone paperless for environmental reasons. Ben was already making notes. Do you know which company held the policy or the investments? Catherine shook her head, but Michael spoke up. Guardian Trust. I saw it on the envelopes. The room fell silent as the implications sank in. James hadn't just betrayed me with his infidelity. He had potentially stolen his own children's inheritance to fund his relationship with Veronica. We need those password-protected accounts, Ben said quietly. Catherine was already pulling out her folded paper with James's passwords. I told you we'd need these. As Madeline accessed James's private email and financial accounts, the full scope of his deception emerged. Beyond the affair and the diverted funds, James had been systematically preparing for his exit for nearly a year, consulting divorce attorneys, liquidating investments, even researching jurisdictions with favorable custody laws for fathers. Most disturbingly, he'd been building a case against me. Emails to his attorney claiming I was emotionally unstable, uninvolved with the children, even hinting at substance abuse issues that existed solely in his imagination. He's been laying groundwork to take the children if you contested anything, Ben observed grimly. Standard tactic for someone planning to control the divorce narrative. I felt physically ill. How could he do this? To his own children? Because it's not about them, Olivia said with unexpected insight. It's about his image. The successful attorney, the devoted father overcoming tragedy, the man who sacrificed to keep his family together. That's the story he tells himself and the world. Anything that threatens that narrative has to be eliminated. Like me, I said softly. Like anyone who sees the truth, Catherine corrected, her expression far too knowing for a 15-year-old. Mom saw it eventually. That's why they were talking about separation before she got sick. This revelation, that James's first marriage had also been failing, added another layer to his calculated deception. Not just of me, but of everyone who knew him. Michael, who had been quiet throughout these discoveries, suddenly spoke up. There's something else you should know. He pulled out his phone and navigated to a folder of screenshots. Dad's been texting me about how you're not really our parent, how we don't have to listen to you anymore, how he and Veronica will give us a better home. The naked manipulation evident in these messages, sent to a 12-year-old boy, broke through my shock. The simmering anger I'd been suppressing since last night finally boiled over. That's enough, I said, standing up. James has taken enough from all of us. He doesn't get to take anything more. Everyone looked at me with varying degrees of surprise. I realized it might have been the most definitive statement I'd made in years, certainly the most oppositional toward James. What do you want to do? Ben asked, lawyer mode temporarily suspended as he responded to my newfound determination. What did I want? The question itself was revelatory. For 5 years, my wants had been secondary, accommodating James's career, the children's needs, the social expectations of being married to a prominent attorney. My own desires had become so muted I struggled to identify them. But now, facing the systematic dismantling of the life I'd helped build, something crystallized within me. Not just anger, though that was certainly present, but a fierce resolve I barely recognized. I want to stay in the children's lives, I said firmly. I want to protect what James tried to steal from them. I paused, the next word surprising even me. I want to reclaim what I set aside when I married him. My full career, my independence, my voice. Olivia smiled, the first genuine smile since she'd arrived that morning. Now that sounds like the Eliza I remember. The one who organized that protest when the university tried to cut the arts program. The one who flew to Florence alone for a year of study without knowing a soul there. That woman still exists, Madeline agreed, reaching for my hand. She's just been dormant for a while. Their confidence in this previous version of myself, a version I'd almost forgotten, felt like oxygen to a flame that had nearly died. Could I truly reclaim that independence, that passion, especially now when circumstances were so precarious? Catherine moved to stand beside me, her teenage frame already nearly my height. I saved something, she said quietly. From last year, when we were cleaning out the attic storage. She left the room briefly and returned with a dust-covered portfolio case I recognized immediately. My collection of curatorial projects, research proposals, and academic papers from before my marriage. Work I'd been proud of that had established my early reputation in the museum world. "Why did you save this?" I asked, running my fingers over the leather binding. "Because sometimes you'd talk about your old projects, and you'd seem more alive," she answered simply. "I thought you might want it again someday." The gesture, this teenage girl preserving a piece of my identity I'd willingly packed away, moved me deeply. I opened the portfolio and found myself facing an ambitious proposal I'd drafted 6 years ago for an exhibition on overlooked female Renaissance artists. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts had expressed interest, but I'd set it aside when James and the children became my priority. "The museum's current Renaissance exhibition ends next month," I murmured, details I'd absorbed during my part-time work surfacing unexpectedly. "They haven't announced a replacement focus yet." "So propose one," Olivia urged. "Reclaim your professional standing. Show James, and yourself, what you're capable of." The suggestion ignited something that had been dormant for too long. Not just a career opportunity, but a chance to reconnect with the passion and purpose I'd gradually surrendered. "I'll need to revise everything, update the research," I said, already mentally cataloging the work required. "And my position at the museum is part-time, administrative. This would be a leap." "Then leap," Madeline said simply. I looked around at the impromptu support system that had assembled in less than 24 hours. My sisters, Ben, and most. Movingly, Catherine and Michael. People who saw me not as an accessory to someone else's life, but as a person with value, capabilities, and a voice worth hearing. "First," I said, closing the portfolio with new purpose, "we secure the children's financial future. Then we address the legal issues with the house and divorce. And then—" I took a deep breath, feeling something unfamiliar but essential unfurling within me. "Then I take back what I gave away too easily." In that moment, standing in the living room of a house that technically wasn't mine, surrounded by the wreckage of a marriage built on deception, I felt something unexpected. Hope. Not despite the collapse of my carefully constructed life, but because of it. The structures I'd accepted had been revealed as constraints. Their destruction, painful as it was, offered the first true freedom I'd known in years. The next morning dawned with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. Despite having slept only a few hours on the guest room's uncomfortable daybed, I felt strangely energized. The initial shock of James's betrayal had given way to a focused determination that surprised even me. I found Catherine in the kitchen, preparing breakfast with an efficiency that reminded me of myself at her age. Growing up with a single mother who worked 2 jobs, I'd learned early how to manage a household. Catherine had absorbed similar skills, but under different circumstances, first losing her mother to cancer, then adapting to my presence, and now facing her father's abandonment. "I made coffee," she said without turning around, "and there's enough egg white omelet for everyone." "Thank you," I replied, pouring myself a cup. "Have you heard from your father this morning?" She stiffened slightly. 3 texts and a voicemail. "He wants to have dinner with us tonight to explain things properly." As if dinner at some expensive restaurant would make everything okay. "You don't have to see him until you're ready," I assured her, though internally I questioned whether I had the authority to make such a statement. Despite our emotional connection, legally I had no standing to determine Catherine and Michael's relationship with their father. "I know," she said, finally turning to face me, "but eventually we'll have to. He's still our father, and he still has all the power, at least legally." Her pragmatism, so beyond her years, both impressed and saddened me. No 15-year-old should need to be this strategic, this aware of adult complexities. "About that," I began carefully. "Ben made some calls yesterday afternoon. There might be options we haven't considered." Before I could elaborate, my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize. Normally, I would have let it go to voicemail, but given the circumstances, I answered. "Mrs. Winters, this is Harold Griffith from First Boston Trust," came a formal male voice. "I'm calling regarding some unusual activity on your family trust accounts. I've been trying to reach your husband, but he hasn't returned my calls." "Family trust accounts?" I caught Catherine's alert gaze and put the call on speaker. "I'm sorry, Mr. Griffith, but I'm not familiar with these accounts," I replied honestly. A pause. "I see. Well, these are the educational trusts established for Catherine and Michael Winters, funded initially by their maternal grandparents and the insurance policy from their late mother. As co-trustee, your husband requested a full liquidation last week, with funds to be transferred to an offshore account. Given the unusual nature of this request and the specific terms of the trust, I've been attempting to verify before proceeding." My heart raced as I processed this information. Not only had James been siphoning money from our joint accounts, but he had attempted to access funds legally designated for his children's education, funds I hadn't even known existed in this form. "Mr. Griffith, I believe there may be some concerning circumstances surrounding this request," I said carefully. "My husband and I are currently separating, and I've only just become aware of certain financial irregularities. Could you possibly freeze any transactions until we can sort this out legally?" "That would be highly unusual without a court order," he replied, though I detected hesitation in his voice. "However, given that the trusts were explicitly created for the children's benefit with irrevocable terms, I can certainly delay any liquidation pending further documentation. Perhaps if the children's maternal grandparents, the original grantors, were to contact us." Catherine was already pulling out her phone, texting rapidly. "I'm contacting Grandma Eleanor right now," she whispered. "She'll call them immediately." After obtaining Mr. Griffith's direct contact information and assuring him that Eleanor Morrison would be in touch, I ended the call and turned to Catherine. "You're still in contact with your maternal grandparents?" I asked, surprised. James had always maintained that his first wife's parents had moved to Arizona after their daughter's death and preferred limited contact with painful reminders of their loss. Catherine's expression hardened. "Dad told you we weren't close, didn't he?" Another lie. "We video chat with them every Sunday when he's at his golf game. They've been trying to see us more, but Dad always makes excuses." Another layer of deception revealed. I wondered how many more would emerge in the coming days. "They wanted to come to Boston last Christmas," Michael added, appearing in the kitchen doorway in rumpled pajamas. "Dad said you were too busy hosting your work colleagues to accommodate them." The fabrication took my breath away. I had specifically suggested inviting Catherine and Michael's grandparents for the holidays, only to be told by James that they preferred to spend Christmas in their retirement community. He kept everyone separated, I realized aloud. Me from my family, you from your grandparents. "Classic isolation tactic," came Olivia's voice as she entered the kitchen, her nurse's analytical mind immediately identifying the pattern. Abusers separate their victims from support systems. "Dad wasn't abusive," Michael objected, loyalty to his father flaring despite everything. "Not physically," Olivia clarified gently. "But emotional manipulation, isolation, financial control, these are forms of abuse too." The word hung in the air, uncomfortable, yet increasingly difficult to dismiss. I had never categorized my marriage in such terms, but the systematic nature of James's deceptions, the careful way he'd limited my independence while maintaining the appearance of a perfect partnership, it fit patterns I'd read about but never applied to my own life. "Let's focus on practical matters this morning," I suggested, seeing Michael's distress. "We have the children's trust accounts to secure, and Ben mentioned some options regarding my legal standing with Catherine and Michael." As if summoned. By his name, Ben appeared with Madeline, both dressed for the workday but clearly planning to delay their regular obligations to continue helping us. "I've been researching Massachusetts family law," Ben said, accepting a coffee mug from Catherine. There's something called de facto parent status that might be relevant here. It's when someone who isn't a legal parent has functioned as one, providing care, making decisions, forming significant bonds. Courts sometimes recognize these relationships, especially when it's in the children's best interest. Would that give Eliza rights to stay in our lives if Dad tries to stop her? Catherine asked directly. Potentially, Ben nodded. It's not automatic, but given your ages and the length of Eliza's involvement, plus documentation of her parental role, there's a foundation there, particularly if you both express a preference for maintaining your relationship with her. Hope flickered, fragile but persistent. What kind of documentation would help? School records showing your involvement, medical forms where you're listed as a contact, evidence of daily care and decision-making, Ben explained. Text messages, emails where James acknowledged your parental role, testimony from teachers, healthcare providers, even family friends who observed your relationship with the children. I thought about the past 5 years, the parent-teacher conferences I'd attended, the doctor's appointments I'd managed, the countless daily decisions about Catherine and Michael's lives that had fallen to me while James focused on his career. There would be evidence, certainly, though I'd never thought to preserve it for this purpose. I have something, Michael said suddenly, disappearing back upstairs before returning with a leather-bound book. Dad gave me this when Mom died. It's supposed to be for important memories. He opened it to reveal a carefully maintained scrapbook. Among photos of his mother and early childhood memorabilia were pages dedicated to the years since I'd entered. Their lives. School projects with my encouraging notes in the margins. Birthday cards I'd written. A program from Catherine's debate championship, where I was listed as parent, guardian. Photographs of ordinary moments, helping with homework, baking holiday cookies, teaching Michael to ride a bike. You kept all this? I asked, touched beyond words. Michael nodded, somewhat embarrassed. When Mom died, I got scared I'd forget things about her, so I started keeping everything important. And then, when you came, he shrugged, his 12-year-old emotional vocabulary insufficient for explaining the significance. This is exactly the kind of documentation that helps, Ben said gently, recognizing the emotional weight of the moment. It shows the developed relationship, the ongoing involvement. While we examined Michael's memory book, Madeline's phone rang. After a brief conversation, she turned to us with a mixture of concern and vindication. That was my contact at the bank. James just attempted to empty all his personal accounts, including liquidating several investments. Given what we discovered, yesterday I had placed a temporary fraud alert on his accounts, standard procedure when questionable activity is suspected. Can they stop him? I asked. They've frozen the accounts pending investigation, she confirmed. It won't hold forever without legal action, but it buys us time to file for emergency orders regarding marital assets. The coordinated effort to protect what James had tried to take, the children's trusts, the marital assets he'd attempted to hide, felt like the first concrete victory in a battle I hadn't even known I was fighting until 2 days ago. Small but significant steps toward reclaiming what was rightfully ours. My phone buzzed with a text from James. My accounts are frozen. I assume you're behind this. These childish tactics only hurt everyone involved. Call me immediately so we can discuss this like adults. The familiar tone, condescending, positioning himself as the reasonable party while implying my incompetence, no longer intimidated me as it once would have. Instead, I felt a strange sense of clarity, recognizing the manipulation inherent in his words. He's angry, I observed, showing the text to the others. Good. That means we're doing something right. Olivia grinned. There's my sister. I was wondering when she'd fully return. Her comment struck me more deeply than she likely intended. Who was I really? The confident curator who had once fearlessly pursued her passion for art history. The Accommodating wife who had gradually surrendered her independence for a marriage built on illusions? Or someone new emerging from the collision of these experiences? Speaking of returning, I said, making a decision, I need to go to the museum. Today. I've been thinking about what we discussed yesterday, about reclaiming my professional standing. There's a curatorial meeting this morning that I'd normally skip, but I think it's time I participated more fully. Are you going to propose your exhibition idea? Catherine asked, revealing that she'd been paying attention to yesterday's discussions. Eventually, I nodded. But first, I need to reestablish myself, remind them that I'm more than just a part-time cataloger. I was hired for my expertise in Renaissance art, even if that aspect of my role has been minimized over time. Just like everything else about you, Olivia observed with characteristic bluntness. The parallel wasn't lost on me. Just as James had gradually isolated me from family and friends, I had allowed my professional identity to be diminished, accepting reduced hours, declining challenging projects, stepping back from leadership opportunities, all in service to a family life that James himself had been systematically undermining. Not anymore, I said with newfound determination. Benjamin Morrison, the museum director, has been hinting for months that they want to expand their Renaissance collection. He keeps asking for my input whenever I can find the time. Today, I'm making the time. What about everything here? Michael asked, gesturing vaguely to encompass the legal and financial chaos we were navigating. We've got it covered, Madeline assured him. Ben has cleared his morning schedule and I've rearranged my clients. Olivia doesn't work until tonight. We'll continue gathering documentation and preparing for whatever legal steps come next. Catherine stepped forward, her expression resolute. And I've contacted Grandma Eleanor. She and Grandpa are booking flights from Arizona. They'll be here tomorrow. The swift mobilization of support, from my sisters, from Ben, from the children, themselves, and now from their maternal grandparents, created a foundation I hadn't realized was possible just days ago. James had worked so effectively to isolate each of us that we'd failed to recognize our collective strength. I went upstairs to prepare for the museum meeting, selecting clothing I rarely wore anymore. A tailored blazer, a silk blouse, professional attire that had gradually been replaced in my wardrobe by the more casual clothes appropriate for my reduced role. As I dressed, I caught sight of myself in the mirror and paused, really looking at the woman reflected there. She appeared different somehow, standing straighter, eyes more focused, an air of purpose replacing the accommodation I'd grown accustomed to seeing. This wasn't just about clothing or a meeting. It was about reclaiming the professional identity I'd willingly diminished to fit into James's narrative. When I returned downstairs, Olivia handed me a set of keys. New house keys. We had the locks changed this morning while you were upstairs. James's key won't work anymore. The small metal objects represented more than security. They symbolized a reclaiming of space, a declaration that the home James had controlled was transforming into something new. Thank you, I said, pocketing them. All of you. I don't know how I would be handling this without you. You'd be handling it? Madeline said confidently. Maybe differently, but you've always been stronger than you give yourself credit for, Eliza. Even when you were fitting yourself into James's world, that strength was still there, waiting. As I prepared to leave for the museum, Catherine handed me my old portfolio, now dusted off and organized. For inspiration, she said simply. I accepted it, recognizing the weight I carried was not just leather and paper, but the responsibility of modeling for these children what resilience truly looked like. How to face betrayal not with collapse, but with determined rebuilding. How to reclaim what was valuable while discarding what no longer served. I'll be back this afternoon, I promised. We'll continue figuring this out together. As I stepped outside, the April morning felt unexpectedly hopeful. Not despite the challenges ahead, but because for the first time in years, I was moving toward something authentic rather than maintaining something false. The path forward was uncertain and undoubtedly difficult, but it was, finally, truly mine. The Boston Museum of Fine Arts stood majestic against the morning sky, its neoclassical columns gleaming in the spring sunshine. I'd walked through these doors hundreds of times over the years, but today felt markedly different. Instead of slipping in through the staff entrance with my head down, focused on the cataloging tasks that had become my professional identity, I walked with purpose toward the main administrative wing. The monthly curatorial meeting would be starting in 20 minutes. Gathering I'd been invited to attend since my hiring, but had gradually stopped participating in as my role diminished. James had always scheduled something that conflicted, a school event I couldn't miss, a dinner with his colleagues that required my presence, or some household emergency that only I could handle. Eventually, the invitations became perfunctory, with everyone assuming I wouldn't attend. As I approached the conference room, I noticed several curators already gathering, cups of coffee in hand, engaging in the professional banter that shapes museum politics. Conversations paused momentarily as I entered, surprise registering on several faces. Eliza? Benjamin Morrison, the museum director, recovered first. What a pleasant surprise. We weren't expecting you this morning. I've rearranged my schedule, I replied, projecting a confidence I was still working to fully reclaim. I wanted to participate in the discussion about the upcoming exhibition calendar, particularly as the Renaissance showing concludes next month. Benjamin's eyebrows rose, slightly, but his smile seemed genuine. Well, your timing is perfect. That's precisely what we're addressing today. I took a seat at the table rather than along the wall where part-time staff typically position themselves. A small gesture of reclamation, but it felt significant. As I set my portfolio on the table, Diana Chen, the Asian art curator who had started at the museum around the same time I had, gave me an encouraging nod. Before we begin, Benjamin announced once everyone was settled, I'd like to update you all on our acquisition efforts. The Medici Court painting I mentioned last month is now officially part of our collection, thanks to a generous donor. Murmurs of appreciation rippled through the room. The painting in question, a previously private family treasure depicting Lorenzo de' Medici with his cultural advisors, was a significant addition to the museum's Renaissance holdings. The question now becomes how to properly showcase it, Benjamin continued. Our current Renaissance exhibition ends in 6 weeks, and we've been considering options for a follow-up focus. I'd welcome thoughts from everyone. Several suggestions emerged, a chronological approach highlighting the transition to mannerism, a thematic exhibition exploring religious versus secular patronage, or a technical focus on the evolution of materials and methods. All were valid academic approaches, yet somehow lacking in vision that might capture public imagination. I opened my portfolio, finding the proposal I'd drafted years ago. Though the specific collection pieces referenced would need updating, the core concept remained relevant, perhaps even more so in current conversations about representation in art history. When there was a natural pause in the discussion, I spoke up. I'd like to suggest an alternative approach. All eyes turned to me, some curious, others skeptical. The Medici acquisition presents an opportunity to explore Renaissance artistic patronage from a perspective we haven't fully examined before, I began. While Lorenzo de' Medici's support of male artists is well documented, the Medici women, particularly Lucrezia Tornabuoni and later Eleonora of Toledo, were equally significant patrons, yet their contributions remain understudied and underrepresented in major exhibitions. I outlined my proposal for The Invisible Hand, Women as Patrons and Creators in Renaissance Art, explaining how it could incorporate both our existing collection and strategic loans to illuminate the often overlooked female influence on Renaissance. Cultural production. What's particularly compelling, I concluded, is that this approach contextualizes our new Medici painting, while offering a fresh perspective that would attract both scholarly interest and public engagement. It also aligns with the museum's stated commitment to expanding perspectives within traditional art historical narratives. A thoughtful silence followed my presentation. Benjamin was the first to respond. "This is remarkably well considered. Eliza, have you been developing this concept for some time?" "The initial framework was something I explored before joining the museum," I acknowledged. "I've continued refining it over the years, though I haven't had the opportunity to formally propose it until now." Diana Chen leaned forward. "I particularly appreciate how this approach doesn't position women artists as a separate category, but integrates their work within the broader Renaissance context, while highlighting the specific challenges they faced." "Exactly," I nodded, grateful for her understanding. "It's not about segregating these artists, but recognizing the complex ways gender influenced artistic production and patronage. The marketing potential is significant," added Marcus Jeffries from the development department. "We've seen strong public response to exhibitions that offer new perspectives on familiar periods. This could appeal to our core audience while attracting visitors who might not typically attend a Renaissance exhibition." The discussion continued, with various department representatives building on the concept, suggesting specific works that might be included, identifying potential challenges with loans or installation. I participated fully, drawing on knowledge I'd accumulated throughout my career but rarely had the opportunity to share in recent years. By the meeting's end, Benjamin had scheduled a follow-up session specifically focused on developing the exhibition concept further, with me designated as the lead curator, a position I hadn't held since before my marriage. "You'll need more hours than your current schedule allows," he noted as the meeting concluded. "Would you be open to discussing a return to full-time status? We've kept your position description technically intact, even though your actual responsibilities have been reduced at your request?" "At my request." Another revelation. I had believed my reduced role had been a mutual decision based on family needs, but Benjamin's phrasing suggested James had communicated this as my preference rather than his expectation. "I would be very interested in that discussion," I replied, careful not to reveal the personal upheaval behind my sudden availability. "My circumstances have changed recently. I find myself with both the time and the desire to re-engage more fully with my curatorial work." "Excellent," Benjamin said, genuine enthusiasm in his voice. "I've always considered you one of our most promising scholarly voices. I confess I've been disappointed by your reduced involvement in recent years, though of course I respected your choice to prioritize family matters." As we walked together toward his office to discuss details, he added more quietly, "You seem different today, Eliza. More like the curator I initially hired. It suits you." The observation, kindly meant, underscored how profoundly I had altered myself to accommodate James's expectations, so much so that even professional colleagues had noticed the diminishment. In Benjamin's office, we outlined a transition back to full-time status, with my exhibition proposal as the primary focus. The salary increase was substantial, moving from my part-time compensation to a senior curator level appropriate for someone leading a major exhibition. "I'd like to formalize this as soon as possible," I said, thinking of the uncertain financial future I now faced. "Would next week be too soon to begin the new schedule?" Benjamin looked pleased. "Not at all. I'll have HR prepare the paperwork immediately. The timing works perfectly with our exhibition planning timeline." As I left his office, Diana Chen fell into step beside me. "That was quite a re-emergence," she said with a smile. "I've missed your voice in these discussions." Her friendly comment invited confidence, and I found myself wanting to share at least some of my situation with a colleague who might become an ally. "I'm going through some significant personal changes," I admitted. "Part of that involves reclaiming aspects of my professional life that I've neglected." Diana nodded thoughtfully. I suspected something had shifted, You've always had brilliant insights about Renaissance art, but for years you've seemed constrained somehow. That's an accurate assessment, I acknowledged, but that constraint is lifting. Well, whatever prompted this change, I'm glad to see it, she said sincerely. And if you need any support with the exhibition development, or anything else, please know you can count on me. Her offer of alliance, simple yet genuine, reinforced what I was gradually relearning: that authentic connections were available beyond the isolated world James had constructed around me. As I walked through the museum toward the exit, I passed through the current Renaissance exhibition, the very spaces where my proposed show would eventually be mounted. I paused before a Botticelli portrait of a young noblewoman, noting the details that revealed her intelligence and education. The book discreetly positioned in the background, the mathematical instrument partially visible on the table beside her, signals that would have been recognized by informed viewers of the period but often overlooked by modern audiences. Like me, her full capabilities had been deliberately obscured, presented in ways that conformed to expectations rather than reflecting her complete self. Yet the evidence remained for those who knew how to look. I left the museum with a lightness I hadn't experienced in years. The return to meaningful work that connected to my deepest interests and utilized my specific expertise, felt like recovering a vital piece of myself that had been set aside for too long. When I arrived home, still thinking of the Beacon, Hill House as home despite its uncertain status, I found Eleanor and Robert Morrison already there, having taken an earlier flight than expected. Catherine and Michael were engaged in animated conversation with their grandparents, while Olivia and Madeline appeared to be reviewing documents with them at the dining room table. Eleanor, a petite woman in her 70s with Catherine's perceptive eyes and determined chin, rose immediately to greet me. "You must be Eliza," she said warmly. "I've waited far too long to meet you properly." The simple acknowledgement of James's orchestrated separation between us brought unexpected tears to my eyes. "I'm so glad you're here," I managed. "The children have missed you tremendously." "As we've missed them," Robert said, joining his wife. Tall and still robust despite his age, he had clearly been the source of Michael's gentle demeanor. "And we've been curious about the woman they speak of with such affection in our weekly calls." "Weekly calls?" I repeated, another piece of James's deception becoming clear. The children hadn't just had occasional contact with their grandparents. They'd maintained a regular relationship conducted entirely without my knowledge. "Every Sunday morning," Eleanor confirmed, "though we were led to believe you were always too busy to join." Before I could process this new information, Catherine interrupted with excitement. "Eliza, tell them about the museum. Did they approve your exhibition idea?" Her enthusiasm pulled me back to the present moment and my small but significant professional victory. I described the meeting outcome, the positive reception to my proposal, and my impending return to full-time curatorial work. "That's wonderful news," Eleanor said genuinely. "The children have told us about your expertise in art history. It sounds like criminally underutilized talent from what we've gathered." "It has been," I acknowledged, "but that's changing now." Robert glanced toward the dining room table covered in legal documents. "Many things appear to be changing. We've been reviewing the trust documentation with your sisters. It seems James has been less than forthcoming about several financial matters." "That's putting it mildly," Madeline interjected. "We've uncovered systematic misrepresentation about the children's inheritance from their mother, the terms of the educational trusts, and the ownership structure of this house." "The house?" I asked, surprised. "What about it?" "That's the most interesting development," Ben explained, emerging from the kitchen with coffee mugs. "According to the documentation the Morrisons brought, this house wasn't purchased solely by James, as he's claimed. A significant portion of the down payment came from Lisa Morrison's family inheritance, with specific provisions regarding the children's right to remain here until adulthood. The revelation that even the basic narrative about our home had been fabricated left me momentarily speechless. Every foundation I'd thought solid was proving to be built on James's careful constructions rather than truth. "We never imagined James would misrepresent these arrangements," Eleanor said, regret evident in her voice. "Lisa was always the one who handled important financial matters. After she passed, we trusted James to honor their agreements. He presented himself as the grieving widower dedicated to his children," Robert added, his expression hardening. "We wanted to believe that, especially for Catherine and Michael's sake. We should have been more vigilant. We all wanted to believe in the version of James he presented," I said quietly, seeing how completely he had manipulated everyone around him. His children, his in-laws, me, even professional colleagues. "He's extremely skilled at creating the narrative that benefits him most. But that skill has limits," Olivia pointed out. "Now that we're comparing notes and examining documentation, the inconsistencies are impossible to ignore." As if to emphasize this point, my phone rang with a call from James's law firm. I answered, placing it on speaker so everyone could hear. "Mrs. Winters, this is Patricia Hargrove, your husband's attorney," came a crisp, professional voice. "I'm calling to discuss settlement terms for your separation. Mr. Winters is prepared to be quite generous, provided we can resolve matters quickly and discreetly." "I appreciate your call, Ms. Hargrove," I replied, a new confidence in my voice. "However, I'll need any settlement proposals in writing, directed to my attorney. And you should be aware that there are now multiple legal questions regarding financial disclosures and trust management that will need to be addressed before any settlement discussions can meaningfully proceed." A brief silence followed. "I see," she finally responded, her tone noticeably cooler. "And may I ask what specific concerns you're referring to?" "My attorney will provide a comprehensive list," I said, following Ben's silent coaching as he gestured for me to remain vague. "But they include questions about the Morrison family trusts, the property ownership of the Beacon Hill residence, and potentially improper movement of joint marital assets." Another longer pause. "I'll consult with Mr. Winters and be in touch. Through proper channels," she said finally, ending the call abruptly. "That," Robert observed with grim satisfaction, "is the sound of a lawyer realizing her client hasn't been entirely forthcoming." Eleanor reached for my hand. "Eliza, we want you to know something important. Regardless of what happens between you and James, we consider you family. You've been a mother to our grandchildren during extraordinarily difficult years. That connection doesn't disappear because James has made poor choices." Her words, the explicit acknowledgement of my role and value independent of my marriage, touched something deep within me. For 5 years, I had defined myself primarily as James's wife and Catherine and Michael's stepmother, roles that seemed suddenly precarious in the wake of his betrayal. Eleanor's statement offered a different perspective, that the connections I'd built had validity and persistence beyond legal definitions. "Thank you," I said simply, unable to fully express what her recognition meant. "Now," she continued with practical determination that reminded me of Catherine, "let's discuss next steps. Robert and I are planning to stay in Boston indefinitely to support all of you through this transition. We've already spoken with our attorney in Arizona about the trusts, and he's connecting with Ben to coordinate the legal response." As the IC conversation turned to logistics and strategies, I found myself observing the room with new eyes. This gathering of people, my sisters, Ben, the Morrisons, the children, represented something James had systematically worked to prevent. A united community of support that could see through his carefully constructed narratives. In just 3 days, the isolation that had characterized my marriage was crumbling, replaced by connections that offered both practical assistance and emotional sustenance. The path ahead remained challenging, the legal and financial complexities daunting, but for the first time, I wasn't facing them alone or from a position of fundamental disadvantage. More importantly, I was reconnecting with parts of myself that had been dormant during my marriage. My professional identity, my capacity for independent decision-making, my ability to stand firm in difficult circumstances. These aspects hadn't disappeared. They had simply been carefully, strategically suppressed. As Catherine slipped her hand into mine, leaning against my shoulder while the adults discussed legal strategies, I recognized that my transformation wasn't just about reclaiming what had been lost. It was about discovering new strengths I hadn't known I possessed, resilience that emerged precisely because of the challenges I now faced. "Are you okay?" Catherine whispered, perceptive as always. I considered the question honestly. Just days ago, my world had shattered with a single phone call during dinner. The future I had planned, the marriage I had believed in despite its limitations, had vanished in moments. By conventional metrics, I was far from okay. Yet strangely, beneath the hurt and uncertainty, something else was emerging, a sense of possibility that had been absent for years. The professionally rewarding morning at the museum, the strengthening bonds with Catherine and Michael, the unexpected alliance with their grandparents, the rediscovery of my own voice and agency, all suggested that what James had taken from me was far less valuable than what remained. "I'm getting there," I told her truthfully, one step at a time. 1 week after James's mistress called during our family dinner, I stood in our bedroom, my bedroom now, sorting through the last of his remaining possessions. Despite his insistence that professional movers would handle everything, he'd left behind odd assortments of items: cufflinks gifted by clients, books he'd prominently displayed but never read, and framed awards from legal associations that had mysteriously not made it to his new condo with Veronica. Eleanor knocked softly on the doorframe. "Need any help with that?" "Just finishing up," I replied, closing a box labeled James, Miscellaneous. It's strange how someone can live in a space for years, yet leave so little of genuine personal significance behind. She nodded thoughtfully, settling into the reading chair by the window. Lisa used to say something similar about him, that he was like a hotel guest in their marriage, impeccably dressed and unfailingly polite, but never fully unpacked. These glimpses into James's first marriage had become increasingly valuable to me, helping me understand that the issues in our relationship weren't unique or my fault, but part of a pattern long established. "Did you know," Eleanor continued, "that when Lisa was diagnosed with cancer, James's first response was to create a spreadsheet analyzing how her illness might impact his 5-year career plan?" I paused in my sorting. "That sounds exactly like him." "He's always been remarkably consistent in prioritizing himself," she agreed, "which makes what you did for the children all the more important." I placed the final box by the door. "I only did what any responsible parent would do." "No," Eleanor said firmly. "Many people would have walked away when things became difficult. You stayed, you nurtured, you protected. Even now, when it would be easier to focus solely on your own rebuilding, you're fighting to maintain your connection with Catherine and Michael." Her validation touched me deeply. In the professional realm, my swift return to full-time curatorial work had been met with enthusiasm and support from museum colleagues. But in the personal sphere, my role remained legally tenuous, a reality that James's attorney emphasized in every communication. "The children's guardianship hearing is tomorrow," I reminded her, anxiety creeping into my voice despite my efforts to contain it. "James is pushing for immediate full custody with no formal access rights for me." "Which is precisely why Robert and I filed our own petition," Eleanor stated calmly. "If James thinks he can simply erase you from their lives, he's overlooking the fact that we have standing to challenge his parental decisions." The legal strategy Ben had developed with the Morrisons' attorney was both elegant and unprecedented. As maternal grandparents with established relationships with the children, they were requesting formal visitation rights that specifically included me as part of their family unit. While not guaranteeing my continued relationship with Catherine and Michael, it created a legal pathway that James couldn't simply dismiss. "I appreciate everything you're doing," I said sincerely. "I know this level of conflict isn't what you expected in your retirement years." Eleanor smiled wryly. Retirement was getting dreadfully boring anyway. Besides, Robert and I have been wanting to spend more time in Boston. The apartment we've leased near Copley Square puts us within walking distance of both the children's schools and your museum. Their commitment to relocating temporarily to Boston had been one of many unexpected supports that emerged in the wake of James's departure. Each day seemed to bring new allies, from my colleagues at the museum offering flexible scheduling to accommodate legal appointments, to parents from the children's schools who organized meal deliveries and transportation assistance when they learned of our situation. Even more surprising was the network of other women who had encountered James professionally over the years and reached out when news of our separation circulated. Their stories revealed a pattern of manipulation and boundary crossing that extended well beyond our marriage, creating a more complete picture of the man I had married. My phone buzzed with a text from Catherine. "Dad's here, downstairs." I froze, unprepared for this confrontation. Since James's departure, all communication had been through attorneys, with exchanges of the children's belongings handled through third parties to avoid direct contact. "Do you want me to send him away?" Eleanor asked, reading my expression. I considered it briefly, then shook my head. "No, this conversation is inevitable. Better to have it on my terms, in my space, with support nearby." As I descended the stairs, I found James in the foyer, impeccably dressed as always in a tailored suit that probably cost more than a month of my newly reinstated curator's salary. Catherine stood several feet away, arms crossed defensively across her chest, while Michael hovered uncertainly in the doorway to the living room. "James," I acknowledged coolly. "This is unexpected." He turned, his expression a careful mask of professional concern. "Eliza, you're looking well." The superficial observation, focusing on my appearance rather than acknowledging the situation he had created, was so characteristic that I almost laughed. Almost. "What brings you here?" "Unannounced?" I asked, remaining on the third step to maintain the height advantage it provided. "I thought we might discuss tomorrow's hearing privately," he replied smoothly. "This adversarial approach isn't necessary. We're both reasonable people who want what's best for the children." "Is that why you've instructed your attorney to request that I have no contact with them?" I countered, keeping my voice level, despite the anger simmering beneath. A flicker of annoyance crossed his face before the professional mask returned. "Legal posturing, nothing more. Of course I understand your attachment to Catherine and Michael, but surely you see that maintaining multiple households with conflicting authority figures would be confusing for them." "What I see," I replied, carefully, "is that you're attempting to sever a parental relationship they value because it's inconvenient for your new arrangement with Veronica." James sighed dramatically, turning to include the children in his performance. "You see how difficult she's making this?" I'm trying to approach this reasonably, but Eliza seems determined to create conflict. It was a familiar tactic, positioning himself as the rational party while framing my legitimate concerns as emotional overreactions. For years, I had acquiesced to this framing, doubting my own perceptions and deferring to his logical approach. But not today. "What's unreasonable," I said clearly, "is expecting your children to pretend I haven't been their primary caregiver for 5 years. What's unreasonable is thinking you can dismantle their sense of family without consequences. What's unreasonable is believing that the courts will allow you to unilaterally determine their best interests when your recent actions demonstrate such profound self-interest." James's expression hardened. I see you've been well coached by your attorney. But let's be realistic about what the law actually supports. Legally, you have no standing. No biological connection. No adoption. Just a failed marriage to their father. The deliberate cruelty of his dismissal hung in the air. Before I could respond, Catherine stepped forward. "Stop it," she said, her voice trembling with controlled fury. "Stop pretending this is about what's best for us. It's about what's convenient for you and Veronica." James turned to her, his expression softening into what I now recognized as calculated affection. "Catherine, sweetheart, adult relationships are complicated. Sometimes they end, but that doesn't change how much I love you and Michael." "Really?" she challenged. "Because you told Veronica we were adjusting well to your relationship 3 months ago. I saw the texts on your iPad when you left it. Open. You've been planning this for ages, talking about us like we're furniture to be rearranged in your new life." James paled slightly, unprepared for this revelation. Michael moved closer to his sister, a silent show of solidarity that seemed to further unsettle their father. "Children shouldn't be involved in these adult matters," James attempted, his voice taking on the authoritative tone he typically used to end uncomfortable conversations. "We're already involved," Michael spoke up, his quiet voice steady despite his obvious nervousness. "You involved us when you lied to everyone." Eleanor appeared on the landing above, silently observing but making her presence known. James glanced up, his expression tightening further at this additional witness to his faltering control of the narrative. "This ambush is inappropriate," he stated flatly. "We'll address everything properly through legal channels tomorrow." "That's what you want, isn't it?" I observed. "Everything sanitized through attorneys, reduced to legal arguments where emotions and relationships can be dismissed as irrelevant. But these aren't abstract legal principles at stake, James. They're your children's lives, their sense of security and family." Something shifted in his expression, a momentary crack in the facade that revealed not guilt or remorse, but irritation at being challenged successfully. "You've clearly coordinated this confrontation," he accused. "Turning my own children against me with emotional manipulation." Catherine made a sound of disbelief. "You're unbelievable. We can't possibly have our own feelings or observations, can we? Everything must be someone else's influence, because God forbid we actually see you clearly." The insight, so mature, so painfully accurate, seemed to genuinely surprise James. For perhaps the first time, he was seeing his daughter not as an extension of himself or an accessory to his life narrative, but as a perceptive individual capable of her own assessments. "Catherine," he began, his tone softer now, recalibrating his approach. "I understand you're upset. Change is difficult. But in time you'll understand that these decisions, while painful, were necessary for everyone's happiness." "Necessary for your happiness," she corrected. "Not ours." An uncomfortable silence fell. James glanced at his watch, a reflexive action I'd seen countless times when conversations became emotionally demanding. "I have a client meeting," he announced predictably. "We'll continue this discussion after tomorrow's hearing, when the legal parameters are established." His retreat to professional obligations in the face of emotional confrontation was so characteristic that I felt an unexpected wave of something like pity. For all his success and calculation, James seemed fundamentally incapable of genuine emotional engagement, a limitation that had shaped our marriage in ways I was only now fully recognizing. "Before you go," I said as he turned toward the door, "there's something you should know. I've accepted the senior curator position at the museum, full-time, with a substantial salary increase. The exhibition proposal I've been developing for years has been approved for next season." He paused, visibly processing this information that contradicted his narrative about my professional limitations. "Well, that's certainly ambitious, given the circumstances. The circumstances being that I no longer have to minimize my capabilities to maintain your comfort, I suggested. The observation offered not with bitterness, but with simple clarity. His jaw tightened. I never asked you to diminish yourself. Not explicitly, I acknowledged. But you created conditions where my success was acceptable only when it didn't overshadow yours. Where my career was framed as a hobby rather than a vocation. Where my expertise was something to mention at your firm's dinner parties, but not something to be actively pursued. Catherine watched this exchange with evident fascination, witnessing a dimension of our marriage she hadn't been fully aware of before. That's your interpretation, James said dismissively. But this isn't the time or place for rehashing marital disappointments. I'll see you all at the courthouse tomorrow. As he reached for the door, Michael spoke up again. Dad? James turned, perhaps expecting a conciliatory gesture from his more reserved child. Yes, son? I've decided I want to be called by my full name now, he said with quiet determination. Michael Morrison Winters, not just Michael Winters. The deliberate reclaiming of his maternal family name, a small but significant assertion of identity, independent of his father's narrative, clearly caught James off guard. We can discuss that another time, he managed, his composure finally cracking slightly. After James departed, we remained in the foyer, the tension of the confrontation gradually dissipating. Eleanor descended the stairs, placing a supportive hand on Michael's shoulder. Your mother would be very proud of both of you, she said softly, standing up for yourselves and for each other. And for Eliza, Catherine added firmly. We're not letting him push her away just because it's inconvenient for his new life. Their fierce loyalty, especially in the face of James's considerable authority and influence, moved me deeply. These children, who had already endured the loss of their mother and now their father's betrayal, were somehow finding the courage to assert their own needs and values rather than simply accommodating adult decisions. Whatever happens in court tomorrow, I told them, nothing changes how I feel about you both. Family isn't just about legal definitions, it's about choice and commitment. And truth, Michael added with unexpected wisdom. Real family tells the truth, even when it's hard. As we moved from the foyer into the living room, I found myself reflecting on Michael's observation. Truth had been the first casualty in my marriage to James, not through dramatic lies initially, but through small compromises and reframed narratives that gradually distanced me from my own perceptions and priorities. Reclaiming truth about my capabilities, my relationships, my value independent of my marriage, had become central to navigating this unexpected life transition. Each small assertion of reality over convenient fiction felt like recovering pieces of myself that had been carefully, strategically set aside. Tomorrow's hearing would determine much about our legal standing and future arrangements. But regardless of the outcome, something fundamental had already been established. The children and I had found our voices, separately and together, in opposition to James's controlled narrative. That reclamation of perspective and agency couldn't be undone, whatever legal parameters were imposed. As Catherine and Michael began setting the dining table for dinner, a routine that had continued despite the household upheaval, I watched their easy coordination and genuine concern for each other. They were demonstrating resilience not by denying pain, but by continuing to build meaningful connections despite it. In that moment, I realized that while James's betrayal had broken the family structure we had known, it had simultaneously created space for something potentially more authentic to emerge, not a perfect or complete replacement for what was lost, but a relationship foundation built on honest acknowledgement rather than convenient fictions. That foundation, however fragile it might currently seem, however threatened by tomorrow's legal proceedings, struck me as ultimately more valuable than the carefully constructed but fundamentally hollow security I had accepted throughout my marriage. The Suffolk County Family Court building loomed gray and imposing against the morning sky. I smoothed down my navy blue dress, chosen carefully to project competence and stability, and took a deep breath before climbing the wide stone steps. Catherine and Michael flanked me, both uncharacteristically formal in their attire, while Eleanor and Robert followed close behind. My sisters and Ben had arrived separately to meet us inside. "Remember what Attorney Levinson said," I reminded the children quietly. "Answer questions honestly but briefly. Don't volunteer information unless asked directly." Catherine nodded, her expression unusually solemn. At 15, she understood the stakes of today's proceedings all too well. Michael, at 12, seemed more nervous, his hand occasionally reaching for mine as we approached the entrance. "It's going to be okay," I assured him, hoping I sounded more confident than I felt. In truth, the outcome of today's hearing remained highly uncertain. Despite the documentation we'd gathered demonstrating my parental role over the past 5 years, family court judges typically favored biological connections and traditional arrangements in custody matters. Inside the courthouse, we found Susan Levinson, the family law attorney Ben had connected us with, waiting in the lobby. In her late 50s, with silver-streaked hair and a commanding presence, she had taken on our case with a passion that went beyond professional interest. "Everyone ready?" she asked, her keen eyes assessing each of us. "Judge Watkins is presiding today. She's thorough and fair, but extremely traditional in her interpretation of family structures. Not encouraging news, but I appreciated Susan's honesty. What's our best approach?" "Reality over technicality," she replied decisively. "We can't compete with James on legal precedent. The law simply hasn't caught up with the complexities of modern family relationships. But we can present the lived reality of your family dynamic in a way that makes ignoring it seem contrary to the children's best interests." As we spoke, I noticed James entering the courthouse, accompanied by his attorney Patricia Hargrove. Unlike our assembled family group, he arrived alone. No Veronica, no colleagues, no supporters. It struck me as tellingly symbolic of the difference in our approaches. I was embedded within a community, while James continued to operate as a solo strategist. He nodded briefly in our direction, but made no attempt to speak with the children, instead huddling with his attorney near the courtroom doors. "Interesting," Susan observed quietly. "He's not using the opportunity to demonstrate affection or connection with Catherine and Michael before we go in. That's a tactical error." The observation made me wonder, not for the first time, how much of James's relationship with his children had ever been genuine rather than performative, enacted when professionally advantageous, minimized when inconvenient. At precisely 9 o'clock, we were called into courtroom C. The space was smaller than I'd imagined, with worn wooden benches and fluorescent lighting that cast everyone in a slightly sickly pallor. Judge Watkins, a stern-faced woman in her 60s, surveyed the assembled parties with clinical detachment. "I've reviewed the petitions before the court," she began without preamble. "We have 3 separate matters to address. Mr. Winter's request for sole custody following marital separation, the Morrison grandparents' petition for formalized visitation rights, and Ms. Winter's—" She paused, glancing down at her notes. "Or should I say Ms. Harrington's request for continued parental involvement, despite lack of biological or adoptive standing." The deliberate use of my maiden name, a technical accuracy but one that immediately positioned me as separate from the family unit, sent a chill through me. Judge Watkins appeared to be establishing her perspective from the outset. James's attorney rose first, presenting his case with practiced precision. According to her narrative, James was the biological father seeking stability for his children during a difficult transition, while I was attempting to insert myself unnecessarily into a family where I had no legal standing. The portrayal was technically accurate, but emotionally dishonest, reducing 5 years of daily parenting to an irrelevant footnote. When it was Susan's turn to speak, she took a different approach. Rather than beginning with legal arguments, she presented the practical reality of our family life through documentation. School records showing my attendance at every parent-teacher conference, medical forms listing me as an emergency contact, testimonials from teachers, coaches, and family friends attesting to my active parental role. Your Honor, Susan concluded, family courts exist to protect children's best interests, not simply to enforce narrow legal definitions. Catherine and Michael Winters have effectively had two mothers in their lives. Their biological mother, tragically lost to cancer 7 years ago, and Eliza Harrington, who has functioned as their mother in every meaningful way for the past 5 years. To suddenly sever that relationship based solely on marital status between the adults would cause demonstrable harm to children who have already experienced significant loss. Judge Watkins remained impassive. While these emotional considerations are noted, Ms. Levinson, the court must be guided by legal standing. Without biological connection or formal adoption, Ms. Harrington's relationship with these children exists at the discretion of their father. It was the response we had anticipated, but still painful to hear stated so bluntly. Susan, however, was prepared for this line of reasoning, which is precisely why the Morrison grandparents' petition becomes crucial, Your Honor. As biological relatives with established legal standing, they are requesting formalized visitation that specifically includes Ms. Harrington as part of their family unit. This legal strategy, using the Morrisons' undisputed rights as a vehicle to maintain my connection with the children, was creative but untested. James's attorney immediately objected, arguing that grandparents couldn't delegate their visitation rights to unrelated third parties. The technical debate continued, with both attorneys citing precedents and statutes that seemed increasingly removed from the human reality at the center of the case. Throughout this legal sparring, Catherine grew visibly tenser beside me, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. Finally, Judge Watkins turned her attention to the children themselves. Given their ages, I believe Catherine and Michael are old enough to express their perspectives on these arrangements. I'd like to speak with them privately in my chambers. As the children followed the judge from the courtroom, James leaned toward his attorney, whispering something that made her nod confidently. His assurance suggested he believed the children's testimony would support his position, a miscalculation that revealed how little he understood their feelings about recent events. The 20 minutes they spent in chambers felt interminable. When they finally returned, Catherine's eyes were slightly red, but she walked with determined composure. Michael looked drained but resolute. Neither glanced in their father's direction as they resumed their seats. Judge Watkins returned to the bench, her expression giving no indication of what had transpired in her chambers. I've heard from both children and considered their wishes in the context of their ages and maturity levels. Before ruling on the petitions before me, I'd like to hear directly from Ms. Harrington. Surprised at being addressed, I rose somewhat unsteadily. Ms. Harrington, you're requesting continued parental involvement with children to whom you have no biological or legal relationship, following the dissolution of your marriage to their father. What makes you believe such an arrangement serves their best interests rather than simply your emotional attachment to them? The question cut to the heart of the matter, challenging me to justify my place in Catherine and Michael's lives beyond my own desires. I took a moment to collect my thoughts, aware that my response might significantly impact the judge's decision. Your Honor, I'm not here because I feel entitled to a relationship with these children. I'm here because they deserve continuity in their care and emotional support during yet another profound disruption to their family structure. I paused, gathering courage for what I needed to say next. 5 years ago, I made a commitment not just to James, but to Catherine and Michael. That commitment wasn't contingent on my marriage lasting forever. It was, and remains, an independent promise to provide the stability, guidance, and love they need throughout their journey to adulthood. Judge Watkins studied me thoughtfully. And if Mr. Winters remarries, would you expect to maintain this role even as another woman potentially becomes their stepmother? My role would naturally evolve, I acknowledged. But children are capable of maintaining meaningful relationships with multiple parental figures. Catherine and Michael have already lost one mother. Forcing them to lose another parental relationship simply because adult circumstances have changed serves no one's interests but their father's convenience. James shifted visibly at this characterization, but remained silent. His attorney scribbled notes rapidly, likely preparing a rebuttal. "And your recent return to full-time employment?" the judge continued. "How does that reconcile with your claim of prioritizing these children's needs?" The question revealed an underlying traditional bias, the implication that proper maternal care required professional sacrifice. Rather than becoming defensive, I addressed it directly. "Your Honor, one of the most important things any parent can model for children is authentic living and personal integrity. Catherine and Michael deserve to see that women can be both dedicated caregivers and fulfilled professionals. My increased professional responsibilities haven't diminished my commitment to them. Rather, they've created a more complete and sustainable foundation for our family life." Something in my response seemed to register with Judge Watkins. Perhaps it was the confidence with which I claimed both my professional identity and my parental role, refusing to accept that they must be in opposition. "Thank you, Ms. Harrington," she said, making a brief notation before addressing the courtroom. "I'll take a 30-minute recess to consider my ruling on these matters." As the judge left the bench, the tension in the courtroom seemed to double. Eleanor squeezed my hand encouragingly, while Robert engaged Susan in quiet conversation about potential outcomes. Across the aisle, James remained isolated, periodically checking his phone with practiced nonchalance that failed to mask his evident anxiety. Catherine leaned close to whisper, "I told the judge everything. About how Dad never attended my debate tournaments, even though he told everyone he was my biggest supporter. About how you're the one who quizzes me on constitutional amendments at midnight before competitions. And I told her about my science project," Michael added quietly. "How Dad took credit at the school reception, but you're the one who stayed up helping me fix the solar panel connections when they kept breaking." Their disclosures, small but significant examples of the gap between James's public parenting persona and the daily reality, brought tears to my eyes. "You didn't have to do that," I whispered back. "Yes, we did," Catherine insisted. "Someone needed to tell the truth about who's actually been parenting us." When Judge Watkins returned precisely 30 minutes later, her expression remained unreadable. She arranged her notes methodically before addressing the courtroom. Family court cases typically involve applying established legal frameworks to straightforward family structures. This case presents more nuanced considerations. She glanced briefly at each party before continuing. "Mr. Winters has legal standing as the biological father. However, the testimony provided today, particularly from the children themselves, raises questions about whether granting his petition for sole custody without conditions would truly serve their best interests at this challenging time." James straightened, his expression tightening almost imperceptibly. Similarly, while Ms. Harrington lacks traditional legal standing, she has clearly functioned as a parental figure in these children's lives for 5 formative years. To sever that relationship abruptly would potentially compound the emotional disruption they're already experiencing. For the first time, I allowed myself to feel a glimmer of hope. Regarding the Morrison grandparents' petition, their legal standing is clear, and their request for formalized visitation is reasonable given their established relationship with their grandchildren. Judge Watkins placed her hands flat on the Maggie bench, her next words carefully measured. "Therefore, my ruling is as follows. Primary physical custody of Catherine and Michael Winters will remain with their father, James Winters, as is consistent with established precedent in cases of biological parentage. My heart sank, though this outcome had been the most likely from the beginning. However, she continued, I am granting the Morrison grandparents petition for regular visitation to include weekends and significant portions of school vacations. During these grandparent visitation periods, Eliza Harrington shall be permitted to participate fully as part of the extended family unit. It wasn't perfect, not the continuous involvement I had hoped for, but it established a legal pathway for maintaining my relationship with the children. Additionally, Judge Watkins continued, surprising everyone, I am implementing a transitional parenting plan for the next 12 months. Ms. Harrington shall have regularly scheduled parenting, time independent of the grandparent visitation, including weekly dinners and alternate weekend overnight stays. After 12 months, this arrangement will be reassessed based on the children's adjustment and all parties' compliance. She fixed James with a direct look. Mr. Winters, the court recognizes your legal rights as these children's father. However, those rights carry the responsibility to prioritize their emotional well-being above personal convenience. The testimony presented today suggests you have not consistently fulfilled that responsibility. The public rebuke, delivered in Judge Watkins's measured but unmistakable tone, seemed to genuinely shock James. His carefully maintained expression of reasonable authority cracked momentarily, revealing the narcissistic entitlement beneath. This court is not in the business of managing adults' feelings about their failed relationships, Judge Watkins concluded. We are here to ensure that children's needs remain paramount during family transitions. The arrangement I've outlined reflects that priority. A detailed written order will be provided to all parties within 48 hours. With a single tap of her gavel, the hearing concluded. For several moments, the implications of her ruling seemed to reverberate through the courtroom. Not a complete victory, but far from the defeat we had feared. A thoughtful compromise that prioritized Catherine and Michael's emotional needs over rigid legal categories. As we gathered our belongings, Catherine threw her arms around me in a rare public display of emotion. See? She listened to us. She actually listened. Michael joined our embrace, his relief palpable. So we still get to be a family? Just differently? Yes, I assured him, holding them both close. Different shape. Same connection. Across the courtroom, James watched this interaction with an unreadable expression before turning abruptly to confer with his attorney. The path forward would undoubtedly include further challenges and adjustments, but the essential foundation had been secured. My relationship with these children would continue, recognized and protected by legal authority. As we left the courthouse, stepping into the bright April sunshine, I felt a weight lift that I hadn't fully acknowledged until its absence. The uncertain future remained daunting in many ways, but we would face it together, not as a conventional family, perhaps, but as a community of connection that transcended traditional definitions and expectations. First victory, Eleanor observed quietly, linking her arm through mine as we descended the courthouse steps. Not the last challenge. No, I agreed, watching Catherine and Michael walk ahead with Robert, already discussing where to have our celebration lunch. But an important beginning. In that moment, standing in the shadow of the legal institution that had both limited and affirmed our unconventional family bonds, I recognized that the truest victories rarely come in the form of complete vindication. Rather, they emerge as hard-won compromises that create space for new possibilities, possibilities that extend beyond established categories and expectations. James's betrayal had initially seemed like the end of a story, the collapse of a family, structure I had invested everything in maintaining. Now, 7 days later, I could begin to see it differently. Not as an ending, but as a painful, necessary transition to something potentially more authentic and sustainable. The future remained unwritten, filled with both challenges and possibilities. But for the first time since that fateful phone call during dinner, I faced that future not just with determination, but with genuine hope. Hope grounded not in wishful thinking, but in the concrete reality of connections that had proven stronger than the structures designed to contain them. 2 weeks after the court hearing, I stood in what was becoming my new workspace at the Boston Museum of Fine Arts. The office, significantly larger than my previous part-time cubicle, featured a wall of windows overlooking the sculpture garden and enough space for a proper research table. Benjamin had insisted on expediting the transition, perhaps sensing my need for professional affirmation amid personal upheaval. "The Renaissance collection files are being transferred over today," Diana announced, appearing in my doorway with a coffee mug in each hand. She offered one to me before settling into the visitor's chair. "How's the exhibition planning coming along?" I gestured to the preliminary layout sketches and artist lists covering my desk. "Gaining momentum. I've identified 15 potential loans from European collections that would complement our holdings perfectly. The Uffizi actually seems interested in lending Sofonisba Anguissola's portrait of Bernardino Campi, a major coup if we can secure it." Diana leaned forward to examine the proposed exhibition flow. "This is impressive, Eliza. You've managed to integrate these overlooked female artists without creating a segregated women's section. They're contextualized within their artistic communities while still highlighting their unique contributions." "That's precisely the approach I wanted," I confirmed. "Not special pleading for their inclusion, but rightful recognition of their significance within Renaissance art history." We discussed technical details for several minutes: lighting requirements, conservation considerations, catalog development, the kind of substantive professional conversation I'd been starved for during my years of reduced engagement with the museum. "I have to ask," Diana said when we'd exhausted the exhibition logistics, "how are you managing all this while dealing with everything else? The custody arrangements, the divorce proceedings, the whole life upheaval?" The question was posed with genuine concern rather than voyeuristic curiosity. Diana had become an unexpected ally over the past weeks, offering both professional support and personal understanding. "Honestly, the work is helping," I admitted. "Having something meaningful to focus on, something completely mine that can't be taken away or controlled by James, it's been essential to my sanity." Diana nodded thoughtfully. "I remember when my own divorce finalized 3 years ago. Everyone expected me to fall apart, but instead, I threw myself into the Japanese prince acquisition project. My ex-husband never understood my career, proving my curatorial judgment without. His constant undermining was surprisingly healing. This casual revelation of shared experience, another woman who had rebuilt her identity after a controlling relationship, felt like a gift. Throughout my marriage, James had subtly discouraged deep friendships with other women, particularly those who might offer perspectives that challenged his narrative. Now, I was discovering connections everywhere, women with similar stories, similar recoveries, similar reclamations of themselves. "Speaking of healing," Diana continued, "several of us are having dinner tonight at Juliana's. Nothing formal, just colleagues unwinding after the board meeting. You should join us." 6 months ago, I would have automatically declined such an invitation, citing family obligations or James's scheduling preferences. Today, I checked my actual commitments. The children were with James until tomorrow afternoon, and made a different choice. "I'd love to," I said simply. Diana's smile suggested she understood the significance of this small but meaningful step toward rebuilding a social identity independent of my former marriage. After she left, I returned to my exhibition planning, losing myself in the satisfying complexity of the work. I was deep in research about Lavina Teerlinck, a Flemish miniaturist who had served as court painter to Henry VIII and his successors, when my phone rang with Catherine's ringtone. "Everything okay?" I answered, immediately alert. Though our court-established visitation schedule was working well overall, Unscheduled calls during James's parenting time usually signaled problems. "Dad's being impossible about the weekend," Catherine said without preamble, her frustration evident. "Grandma and Grandpa invited us to their apartment for Sunday brunch, and they specifically included you in the invitation. Dad's saying it's not part of the visitation agreement, so you can't come." I sighed, unsurprised but disappointed by James's petty maneuvering. Though he had been forced to accept the court's ruling regarding my continued involvement in the children's lives, he sought every opportunity to limit that involvement to the minimum required. Technically, he's right, I acknowledged reluctantly. Sunday is his parenting time, and the grandparent visitation doesn't officially start until next weekend. "That's not fair," Catherine protested. "It's just brunch. He doesn't even want to spend time with us. He's already mentioned having some work thing Sunday morning. He just doesn't want you there." The familiar dynamics were still playing out, James maintaining control through technicalities while disregarding emotional realities. Before, I would have acquiesced immediately, accepting his interpretation without challenge. Now I considered alternative approaches. "Let me try something," I told Catherine. "Don't argue with him about it for now, okay? I'll call you back." After ending the call, I sat quietly for a moment, organizing my thoughts. Then I composed a brief, carefully worded email to James. "James, I understand there's some question about Sunday's brunch with the Morrisons. While it falls outside our formal visitation schedule, I believe allowing me to attend would demonstrate good faith cooperation to both the children and eventually to the court when our arrangements are reviewed in 11 months. Additionally, if you have work commitments Sunday morning, my presence would provide continuity of adult supervision without requiring you to reschedule your professional obligations. Please consider that flexible cooperation now may facilitate similar flexibility when you need schedule adjustments in the future. Regards, Eliza." The approach was strategic, appealing to James's self-interest rather than challenging his authority directly. By presenting my attendance as potentially beneficial to him, I offered a way for him to concede without feeling defeated. Within 20 minutes, James replied with characteristic brevity, "10 a.m., 12 p.m. only. The children need to be ready for other activities by 12:30. Not gracious, but effective." I immediately called Catherine back with the news. "He agreed?" she asked, clearly surprised. "Without a huge argument?" "Sometimes the most effective approach isn't direct confrontation," I explained. "Your father respects strategic thinking, even when he disagrees with the outcome." "You sound like those negotiation books he's always reading," Catherine observed, with a touch of amusement. "Using his own tactics." "I prefer to think of it as speaking a language he understands," I replied. "The important thing is finding ways to maintain our connections without endless conflict." After we ended the call, I returned to my research, but my mind kept returning to the interaction. This small negotiation victory represented something significant. I was learning to advocate effectively for my relationship with the children, without being drawn into James's preferred pattern of control and capitulation. The divorce mediation sessions had revealed a similar pattern. James initially expected to dominate the proceedings through superior legal knowledge and intimidation tactics. His surprise when I arrived with thorough financial documentation, clear boundaries, and reasonable but firm positions had been almost comical. The mediator, a seasoned family attorney, had commented afterward that divorces typically reflected the dynamics of the marriage itself, with the same party maintaining control throughout both processes. "But not in your case," she had observed. "Something's shifted in the power balance." Something had indeed shifted, not just externally, in our legal standing, but internally in my fundamental understanding of my own capabilities and worth. Each successful negotiation, each professional achievement, each moment of clarity about the dynamics that had shaped our marriage contributed to this ongoing transformation. At 5 o'clock, I packed up my research materials and prepared to meet Diana and the other curators for dinner. As I was leaving, Benjamin appeared in my doorway, a large art shipping crate being wheeled in behind him by museum technicians. "Perfect timing," he said, gesturing for the technicians to place the crate carefully on my research table. "This just arrived from the Prado. Thought you might want a first look." My heart quickened. "The Lavinia Fontana loan came through? I thought they were still deciding." "Apparently your proposal was persuasive," Benjamin replied with evident satisfaction. "They've agreed to a 6-month loan of Portrait of a Noble Woman for your exhibition. It hasn't been shown outside of Spain in over a decade." The acquisition was significant. Fontana had been one of the most successful female artists of the Renaissance, the first woman to establish herself professionally as a portrait painter in Western Europe. Having her work as a centerpiece would elevate the entire exhibition. "This is extraordinary," I managed, watching as the technicians carefully began the unpacking process. "Your extraordinary work made it happen," Benjamin countered. "The Prado curator specifically mentioned the scholarly rigor of your proposal as the deciding factor." As the protective coverings were removed, revealing the luminous portrait beneath, I felt a wave of emotion that went beyond professional satisfaction. This painting, created by a woman who had forged an unprecedented artistic identity in a society that offered few such opportunities, seemed to carry personal significance beyond its considerable art historical importance. Lavinia Fontana had navigated extraordinary constraints to pursue her artistic vision, balancing family responsibilities with professional ambitions in ways that defied the expectations of her era. Her determination to claim space for her talents, despite institutional barriers, resonated deeply with my current circumstances. "We'll move it to secure storage once you've had a chance to examine it," Benjamin said, sensing my need for a moment alone with the artwork. "Take your time." After everyone else had left, I stood before the portrait in the fading afternoon light. The noblewoman gazed back with serene confidence, adorned with the symbols of her status, but emanating an inner strength beyond mere social position. Fontana had captured not just her subject's appearance, but her essential character, a testament to the artist's psychological insight and technical mastery. I thought about Catherine and Michael, about the court hearing, about the museum promotion, about the small victory of Sunday's brunch negotiation. Each represented a step toward reconstructing a life that honored my authentic capabilities rather than diminishing them to accommodate someone else's narrative. The path remained challenging. James continued to create obstacles where possible. Financial uncertainties loomed as the divorce proceedings advanced, and balancing my renewed professional commitments with parenting responsibilities required constant adjustment. But underneath these practical complexities, a fundamental shift had occurred in how I understood myself and my possibilities. When my phone buzzed with a text from Diana confirming dinner plans, I took one last look at Fontana's masterwork before carefully helping the technicians reseal the protective coverings. As we secured the painting for transport to the climate-controlled storage facility, I felt a sense of alignment between my professional responsibilities and personal journey. Both involved careful preservation of what was valuable while creating space for new perspectives to emerge. The restaurant Diana had chosen was a small Italian establishment near the museum, its warm lighting and lively atmosphere a welcome contrast to the formal dining experiences that had characterized my social life with James. Around the table sat 6 museum colleagues, curators, conservators, a development officer, engaged in conversation that flowed naturally between professional matters and personal interests. "We're celebrating Eliza's exhibition loan success," Diana announced as I joined them. "The Prado finally said yes." The genuine congratulations that followed, free from the competitive undertones that often characterized James's professional circle, felt like another form of homecoming. These people valued my expertise without qualification, recognized my contributions without measuring them against their own ambitions. As the evening progressed, I found myself sharing more than I had initially intended. Not just about the exhibition planning, but about the broader changes in my life. Rather than the awkward sympathy or voyeuristic curiosity I had feared, my colleagues offered practical support and occasional humor that acknowledged the challenges without defining me by them. When my ex tried controlling the narrative during our split, shared Marcus, the medieval manuscripts curator, I found the most effective response was radical transparency. Hard to manipulate situations when everyone already knows the actual story. Documentation was my salvation, added Sophia from Conservation. Every email, every text, every financial record meticulously preserved. My attorney called it the most organized evidence file she'd ever seen. Each of them had navigated their own life reconstructions, after divorces, career setbacks, health challenges, or family losses. Their stories weren't identical to mine, but the underlying pattern of disintegration and rebuilding resonated across our different experiences. By the time we finished dinner, something had shifted in my relationship with these colleagues. They were no longer just professional connections, but potential friends, people with whom I might build the kind of supportive community that had been gradually stripped away during my marriage. Walking to my car afterward, Diana matched her pace to mine. You know what struck me tonight? How different you seem from when I first met you. Different how? I asked, curious about her perception. More present, she replied thoughtfully. When you first joined the museum, you had this remarkable enthusiasm and intellectual confidence. Then gradually you became more contained. Like you were carefully measuring your contributions, making yourself smaller somehow. Now that original energy is returning, but with more focus. Her observation captured something I had felt but struggled to articulate. The gradual diminishment I had experienced during my marriage, not through dramatic suppression, but through subtle, persistent reshaping to fit James's expectations. I think I confused accommodation with love, I admitted as we reached the parking garage. As if minimizing my own needs and capabilities was somehow proof of commitment. Diana nodded in recognition. The classic trap. We're taught that selflessness is the ultimate feminine virtue, especially in relationships. Took me years to understand. The true partnership requires both people to remain fully themselves. As I drove home to the Beacon Hill house, which the court had temporarily designated as my primary residence until property divisions were finalized, I reflected on Diana's words. The gradual surrender of myself had been so incremental, so seemingly reasonable at each step, that I had barely registered the cumulative effect until James's betrayal forced me to confront the extent of what I had relinquished. The house was quiet and empty, the children's absence still jarring despite the established visitation schedule. Before, I would have filled this solitude with household tasks, organizing, cleaning, preparing for James's return. Tonight, I instead went to the study that had previously been James's exclusive domain, but which I had recently reclaimed as my own workspace. Spread across the desk were materials for both my professional projects and personal reconstruction, exhibition plans, alongside divorce paperwork, research notes beside financial records. The boundaries between different aspects of my life seemed more permeable now, less rigidly compartmentalized than James had always insisted upon. I opened my laptop to check email before bed and found a message from Eleanor with an attachment, labeled "Found these today." Inside were scanned photographs I had never seen before, Catherine as a toddler with her mother, Lisa, Michael as an infant being cradled by his maternal grandmother, family gatherings from before I had entered. Their lives. Eleanor's message was simple. These belong in the children's history. All parts of their story matter, before you, with you, and whatever comes next. We're building a family album that includes everything, everyone who has loved them. Would you add your photos to the collection this weekend? The inclusive gesture, acknowledging my place in the children's lives while also honoring their mother's memory, brought unexpected tears. In James's narrative, Lisa had been a saint-like figure whose memory required distance rather than integration. Eleanor's approach suggested something healthier, that the children's lives were a continuous story with many important characters rather than disconnected chapters. I replied with gratitude, promising to bring photos to Sunday's brunch. Then I spent an hour locating and organizing images from my 5 years with Catherine and Michael. Camping trips and school events, holidays and ordinary moments, visual, evidence of a family connection that transcended legal definitions. As I prepared for bed in the guest room I had claimed as my own, unable to continue sleeping in the space I had shared with James, I noticed the small canvas leaning against the wall. I had started painting it 3 days after James's departure, my first attempt at artistic expression in over a decade. The image remained unfinished. A partial self-portrait emerged from shadows, the face gradually gaining definition against an uncertain background. I hadn't painted since college, had set aside that form of personal expression as impractical early in my relationship with James. Now, I found myself drawn back to it not as a career path, but as a means of processing my ongoing transformation. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, a divorce mediation session in the morning, exhibition planning in the afternoon, helping Michael with science homework during my evening visitation hours. Each domain required different capabilities, different forms of strength and flexibility. But tonight, looking at the emerging self-portrait with its mixture of shadow and emerging clarity, I felt a sense of integration that had been absent for years. The woman I was becoming wasn't defined by rejection or victimhood, by professional achievement alone, or even by my relationship with the children, though all were significant elements of my experience. She was instead an evolving synthesis, someone capable of incorporating painful lessons without being diminished by them, of claiming professional space without apologizing, of loving children not through self-erasure, but through authentic presence and advocacy. The reconstruction remained incomplete, the future still uncertain in many ways. But the foundation being established felt fundamentally different from what had come before. Built not on accommodation and compromise of self, but on hard-won clarity about my own value, capabilities, and right to shape a life that honored, rather than diminished my complete humanity. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.